It started with a laugh, a few drinks, a dare, and the reckless confidence that comes when you think ghosts aren't real. Spend the night in Blackwood Manor, Ryan smirked, nudging his beer bottle toward me. Sunrise or nothing, I scoffed. That's it? One night? Jake grinned, eyes glinting with excitement. You say it like it's easy. Because it is. We were idiots. Young, cocky, and completely unaware of what we were about to invite into our lives. What started as a joke would become the most horrifying experience of my existence. The moment I mentioned Blackwood Manor to a local at the gas station, his expression changed. The man, in his 60s, lowered his voice. His fingers tightened around the gas pump, as if I had said something vile. You don't want to go there, he muttered, eyes darting around as if someone might overhear us. I forced a laugh. It's just an old house. His jaw clenched. That's what they all think. Something in his tone sent a chill through me, but I brushed it off. Old people and their ghost stories. I wasn't scared, at least not yet. I should have listened to the old man. He wasn't the only one. A waitress at the diner gave me a wary look when I mentioned the house. People disappear there, she said, lowering her voice. No one knows where they go. Some just lose their minds. Another customer added, back in '78, a couple went in for a thrill. The cops found their car still running outside. But inside, nothing. Not a trace. Maybe they just ran away, I said. The man shook his head. Then why was the table still set for two? The candles still burning? It didn't make sense. None of it did. But I still didn't listen. I told myself I was just being logical. That fear was for people who believed in ghosts and curses. But something about the house called to me. Even before I got there, I felt it. An invisible pull, like an itch in my brain. A whisper that wasn't really a sound, just a feeling. Come see for yourself. I didn't want to admit it, but I was drawn to it. The fear made me more determined. I needed to prove that it was just another abandoned building. It wasn't. Midnight. The car's headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the rotting gates of Blackwood Manor. The iron bars were twisted, broken open as if something had forced its way in, or out. Ryan handed me a flashlight. 12 hours, he reminded me. No chickening out. I took a deep breath, gripping the rusted gate. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, a shiver ran down my spine. I stepped through. The gate creaked behind me, and as I took my first step toward the house, I could have sworn I heard it. A whisper. Welcome. The road leading to Blackwood Manor was eerily silent, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The old mansion loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the moonlit sky. What had once been a grand estate was now a decaying corpse of its former self. Wooden shutters hanging loose, ivy creeping up the sides like skeletal fingers. The fog curled around its base, thick and unmoving, as if the house were exhaling its own breath. A part of me hesitated. Something about this place felt wrong. But the dare had been made, and turning back now wasn't an option. My fingers tightened around the flashlight as I stepped closer. The house seemed to grow larger with every step, its towering presence almost pressing down on me. The wind howled through the broken windows, creating a sound that almost resembled a whisper. My breath came out shaky. It was just a house, just bricks, wood, and dust. Nothing more. Or so I thought. As I approached the entrance, my fingers hovered over the rusted doorknob. Before I could touch it, the door groaned and creaked open on its own. I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to turn around. But my pride, my stupid, reckless pride, kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was just the wind, I reasoned. Maybe the house had shifted with age. And yet, deep down, I knew neither was true. A thick darkness pooled beyond the threshold, the air inside somehow heavier than the night outside. I swallowed hard and took a step forward. The second I crossed into the house, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. The chill hit me first. A cold, biting sensation wrapped around me, sinking deep into my bones. The air inside felt wrong. Not just cold, but charged, like the weight of something unseen pressed against me. My skin prickled. The beam of my flashlight flickered, struggling against the suffocating darkness. The entryway stretched before me, dust floating in the air like tiny spectres. The scent of damp wood and decay filled my lungs, but beneath it, something else lingered. A faint, metallic smell. Blood. No, that was just my imagination. I forced myself forward. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps, but as I moved deeper into the house, I noticed something unsettling. The creaking wasn't coming from me. Somewhere above me, a floorboard groaned. I stopped mid-step, holding my breath. The sound wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like weight shifting on old wood. My pulse pounded in my ears. I shined the flashlight upward, toward the crumbling ceiling. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. I slowly turned, my flashlight sweeping across the entryway, the staircase, the long, dim hallway stretching into darkness. Every shadow seemed to move at the edge of my vision, shifting just out of sight. Then I heard it, a faint, dragging sound coming from the hallway. My mouth went dry. Something was moving. The air grew impossibly thick, wrapping around me like unseen hands pressing against my chest. Each breath felt labored, like I was inhaling fear itself. My vision blurred at the edges, the darkness stretching, pulsing like a living thing. A deep pressure built behind my skull, making my thoughts sluggish. Was it just panic? Or was something in the house affecting me? I gripped the flashlight tighter, shaking my head to clear the fog in my brain. Focus. It's just an old house. Then the light flickered again, and in the second before it dimmed, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Every hair on my body stood on end. The weight of a gaze, cold, calculating, pressed against me. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. Something was watching me. The feeling wasn't vague or distant. It was close. The darkness wasn't empty. I swallowed hard, scanning the room, but nothing moved. Yet the sensation didn't fade. It lingered, heavy and patient. I wasn't just in the house. The house was aware of me. The flashlight flickered. A tiny stutter in the beam, barely noticeable, but enough. My breath caught. In that split second before the light stabilized, something moved. A dark blur, just at the edge of my vision. I spun around, the beam slicing through the dust-heavy air. Nothing. The entryway was empty, the decaying furniture still as stone. My pulse hammered. My mind tried to reason with itself. Just a shadow, a trick of the light. But my body knew better. Every nerve screamed, every instinct sharpened. I wasn't alone. I swept the flashlight over the walls, my breath shallow. The dim glow stretched long shadows across the cracked wallpaper, stretching unnaturally, warping with every movement. But then I noticed something wrong. One of the shadows wasn't mine. It was just ahead, too far from any object to belong to me, shifting slightly, as if something unseen was standing right there. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, stepping forward carefully. The shadow twitched. I froze, and then it moved, not away, toward me. A sound, soft, barely above a breath, a murmur curling through the hallway like wind through dead leaves. I held my breath, my ears straining. The sound was too distant to make out, but it wasn't just noise. It was a voice with no body, a low whisper, just at the edge of understanding, crawling through the silence. My skin crawled. Every part of me wanted to run, to turn and leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The whisper was getting closer. Something fell. A sharp clatter echoed through the hall, shattering the heavy silence. I whipped around, my flashlight trembling. The beam landed on an old wooden table near the staircase. Something was different. A small porcelain vase, a fragile thing, untouched for decades, now lay on the floor, shattered into pieces. I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted. I had seen that vase on the table just moments ago. I wasn't losing my mind. Something had moved it, something I couldn't see. The air shifted, not just around me, inside the house itself. A slow, suffocating pressure settled in, thick as smoke, pressing against my chest. The whispering had stopped, but the feeling hadn't. The house was awake now, not just an old, empty building, not just walls and dust and forgotten furniture. Something inside it had stirred, and now it was watching me. The table in the center of the room was covered in dust, untouched for years. The wooden surface was cracked, aged by time, but something sat atop it, strangely out of place. A book. It wasn't just any book. It was a diary. Its leather cover, though faded, was intact, the corners curling slightly, as if it had been opened and closed many times before. Something about it felt wrong. The layer of dust around it was thick, undisturbed, but the book itself, perfectly clean, like it had been waiting. I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped the cover open. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded in places, but the words were still readable. At first, it seemed like a normal journal, dated entries, personal thoughts. Then, I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. The words on the page, they were describing me. The boy steps inside, flashlight trembling in his grip. He doesn't know what's waiting for him, but the house does. I turned the page frantically. His breath is shallow now. He feels it watching. Cold terror gripped my chest. This wasn't possible. Someone was writing my every move. And then I saw today's date. The ink was still fresh. The walls creaked, stretching like a tired body awakening from sleep. Number not creaking. Breathing. The air pulsed around me, the walls shifting ever so slightly as if inhaling. The wooden beams groaned. The wallpaper seemed to ripple. I staggered back, pressing myself against the nearest wall. But that only made it worse. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive. The sensation of being watched had been present since I stepped inside. But now, it was unbearable. Not just a feeling. Something was there. I turned my head slowly, scanning the dark corners of the room. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting in ways they shouldn't. My heart pounded. I could feel it. Something was standing just beyond my line of sight. It wasn't moving. It was waiting. My gaze snapped back to the diary, my fingers flipping to the last entry. The ink here was different, hurried, frantic. I read the words, my stomach twisting. If you are reading this, it's too late. The pen was still resting beside it, as if the writer had been interrupted, as if they had planned to write more, but never got the chance. I turned on my heel and bolted toward the entrance, my heart hammering. I had to get out. The door loomed ahead, its frame warped and splintered with age. My fingers wrapped around the handle, twisting violently. Locked. I yanked harder. The handle wouldn't budge. The lock had clicked into place on its own. Panic surged through me. I hadn't locked it. I hadn't even closed it. I turned to the nearest window, hoping, praying, it would open. But before I could move, every other door in the house slammed shut at once. The sound reverberated through the walls, a deafening finality. The house had made its decision. I wasn't leaving. I grabbed a chair and heaved it toward the nearest window. The glass should have shattered instantly, sending shards flying across the room. It didn't even crack. I swallowed hard, lifting the flashlight. The glass was smooth, untouched, but something was wrong. My reflection stared back at me. The problem was, there was no light in the room behind me. No lamps, no outside glow. The only thing in the reflection was darkness. Not the kind that comes from the absence of light. A darkness that was watching, waiting. I took a shaky step back. My reflection didn't move. Then, very slowly, it smiled. A sound made me whip around. Footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, the kind that weren't in a rush, like something was taking its time. The wooden floor groaned behind me. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, breath catching in my throat. Nothing. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled me, moving from one side of the room to the next, always just out of reach. I wasn't alone. And whatever was here, it was enjoying this. A whisper slid through the air, curling around me like cold fingers. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, gentle, close, too close. It spoke in a breathless murmur, the words just barely audible, not loud enough to understand, but loud enough to feel. The whisper came again, a little stronger this time. It said my name. I froze. My hands trembled. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't, because the whisper hadn't come from behind me. It had come from right next to my ear. A realization crawled into my mind, sinking in like ice water. The house wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just playing with me. It had decided. I wasn't a visitor. I wasn't a guest. I belonged here now, and no one leaves unless the house allows it. The darkness wasn't still anymore. It moved, not like the shifting of light against a wall, not like my own shadow stretching across the floor. This was different. This was alive. The flickering beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it toward the far end of the room. The shadows there twisted unnaturally, shifting into shapes that weren't human. Jagged limbs, too long for any person. Bent heads, faces that never quite formed. The dark figures swayed in place, their outlines writhing like smoke. Then, they took a step forward. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. They weren't reflections. They weren't tricks of the light. They were real. A sudden pulse of energy rippled through the air like a silent explosion. The house groaned, the walls trembling, not with age, but with memory. I gasped as the world around me shifted. It was still the same house, the same hallway, but it was different, brighter, lived in, and I wasn't alone. Figures stood in the hall, people, but they weren't looking at me. They were screaming. Their eyes wide, their mouths twisted in terror. They were trapped. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Their faces were hollow with agony, their hands reaching out, grasping at air, begging for escape. Then, the vision snapped away. The house was empty again. The figures were gone. But their fear, it lingered. They had been here once, and now I was here too. A deep vibration rumbled through the house. At first, it sounded like distant thunder, rolling beneath the floorboards. But then the noise changed. Whispers, not one voice, not two, hundreds. A chorus of agony, tangled together, growing louder. The walls shuddered. The sound was inside them, beneath them, everywhere. Then the whispers turned into screams. The entire house shook violently, as if something had awoken inside it. I pressed my hands against my ears, my heart hammering. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to know. But the house didn't care. It remembered everything. A sudden creak cut through the chaos. My breath hitched. The noise hadn't come from the walls. It hadn't come from the floor. It came from above me. I lifted the flashlight, my hands shaking. The attic door sat slightly open, the darkness inside too deep to be empty. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Something was moving up there, and it was coming down. The air dropped to an icy chill. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. A figure stepped onto the first stair. Not a shadow, not a ghost. This was different. This was something else, something that had been waiting. It knew I could see it now. And now, it was coming for me. The flashlight flickered once, twice. Then, it died. The darkness swallowed me whole, complete, absolute. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I pressed the power button. Nothing. No light, no response. Just a black screen reflecting my own terrified expression. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. I tried to steady my breath, but the silence was too heavy, too unnatural. Then, the whispering began. At first, it was just a murmur, a soft, unintelligible hush crawling through the house. But then it grew louder. Many voices, too many, layered on top of each other, their words tangled, suffocating the air. I covered my ears. It didn't matter. The whispers burrowed into my mind, drilling deeper and deeper. And then they screamed, not in fear, not in warning, in agony. The entire house shook with the sound of their suffering. The walls trembled, the floorboards vibrated beneath my feet. I stumbled backward, my chest tightening. I wanted to move, I wanted to run, but something grabbed me. I gasped as an unseen force wrapped around my wrist and yanked me forward. Hard. I crashed onto the floor, my hands scraping against splintered wood. But the grip didn't let go. It pulled, dragging me, inch by inch, deeper into the hallway, deeper into the house. I dug my nails into the floor, my legs kicking, thrashing. But there was nothing to fight against. Just air, just darkness. Something wanted me to stay. Something wasn't letting go. Through the panic, through the terror twisting inside me, a thought hit me like ice. I wasn't the first. This had happened before, to others. The whispers, the shadows, the screaming, I could feel them, trapped, still here. I saw flashes in the darkness, faces contorted in horror, bodies reaching, desperate, begging for escape. But they never escaped. Neither would I. I couldn't breathe. My vision swam. And then, the whisper came again. One voice, closer this time, right against my ear. "You're staying." A cold realization settled in my bones. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a curse. It was hunger. The house didn't just collect souls. It fed on them. And now, it had chosen its next victim. My fingers scraped against the wall as I staggered back, chest heaving. The whispers had stopped. The suffocating grip on my body had vanished. But the air felt wrong. And then, I saw it. A narrow slit in the wallpaper, barely noticeable. I pressed my hand against it, feeling the hollow space behind. The paper peeled away easily, revealing a small hidden doorway. A passage, my only way out. I didn't think, I ran. The second my feet hit the cold earth outside, I gasped, choking on the night air. My lungs burned. My vision swam. But I was out. I turned back toward the house, expecting... What? The door bursting open? A shadow chasing after me? Nothing. The house stood there, silent, still, too still. No wind rustling through the trees, no distant chirp of crickets, just empty, deafening silence, as if the house was watching, as if it was waiting. I forced myself to move, each step heavier than the last. My heart was still racing, but relief flooded my body. I was safe. I had made it out, right? Then why did it still feel like something was behind me? Each step I took, the stillness followed. The weight of the house, the darkness inside it. It wasn't fading. It was coming with me. I reached my car and fumbled with the door handle, my breath still ragged. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. I needed to get the hell out of here. And then I caught a glimpse of my reflection. The car window was fogged, but I could still see my face, my own wide, terrified eyes staring back at me. But something was wrong. I wasn't smiling, but my reflection was. A slow, twisted grin, teeth too white, lips stretching too wide. That wasn't me. My entire body went cold. I reached up, trembling, pressing my fingers to my lips. They weren't moving. But the reflection, it kept smiling. And then, it blinked. A sickening realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I hadn't escaped. The house had let me go, because something else left with me. The moment I stepped back into my apartment, I felt it. At first, it was subtle, just the weight of exhaustion, the heaviness in my chest that I told myself was leftover fear, residual paranoia. I had been through hell. Of course I was shaken, but I was home now, safe. The lights were on. The air was warm. normal. And yet, the unease never left. The feeling of being watched. The sensation that the darkness in the corners of my room was a little deeper than before. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that I had won. I had survived. Right? It started with small things. I would set my keys on the counter, turn away for just a second, then they'd be gone. I'd find them somewhere else. On the table, on the floor, in my bedroom, places I hadn't put them. The kitchen chair, slightly pulled out when I knew I had tucked it in. A closet door open just an inch wider than I remembered. The bathroom mirror had a faint handprint on it one morning. I lived alone. I told myself it was stress, my mind playing tricks on me. But then I started hearing them. The first time, I was half asleep. A murmur, so soft, so faint, that I thought it was the wind outside my window. But it wasn't. The whispers were inside my room. I sat up, my heart hammering. I held my breath, straining to listen. Nothing. But the moment I laid back down, I heard it again. Software familiar. The same whispers from the house. They had followed me home. The nightmares came next. Every night, I saw it. Not my apartment. The house. The rotting floors. The endless hallways. The shadows curling in the corners. I walked through the rooms, past the whispers, past the screams. I knew where I was going. The attic. Every single night, I found myself standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring up into that darkness. And then, something moved. Each time, I woke up before I saw it. Each time it felt closer. I knew the truth before I was willing to say it out loud. I never truly left. I escaped the house, but it came with me. I had opened a door I wasn't supposed to. And now, it was here. It wasn't done with me. And worst of all, I wasn't sure I was even awake anymore.